What's going on, Miracle City? It is PK here, and I am just so excited and honored to actually be with you for part two of this series. I mean, I wasn't expecting it, but I'm just honored that you guys are wanting to just get a little bit more. And I'm going to warn you, you probably making a big mistake, because if you were going to say, hey, let's hear a word, it should have just been last week, because today we are about to be totally and completely challenged. I'm going to keep this 100. Miracle City, I'm about to be all up in your business today. We're going to be in your closet. We're going to come down your street, down your alley, wherever it is. Because what we are learning is that, man, we need our relationships to be healthy. We need them to be successful, particularly for those of us who are of color, because that is part of what's killing our community and the success of society, our community, the success even of the church is based on the strengths that are taking place within our relationships. And so we are going to go in today. We're going to deal with this thing, and we're going to be very intentional and very specific. So right now, what I want you to do is I want you to get your phones out. I want you to send a text to somebody, and I want you to invite them. Say, yo, you need to come over here to Miracle City, because we are about to go in. And also, I want you to get a pad and pen, or also on your phone, your iPad, your computer, wherever it is, and I want you to get ready to take out some notes. I normally don't say that, but the information that we're getting today, I do believe is going to be noteworthy. We're going to help you with a lot of different things on the screen that you can see, but we want you to be able to get this in, because we are all about here at Miracle City having incredible, awesome relationships. And so I'm not going to read a text, but we are going to be in two different areas of the Bible, the beginning and the beginning, the end and the beginning, or the beginning and the end. Number one, the book of Genesis is going to be one of our texts, chapter 1, verses 26 through 28. And then we're also going to be in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. And those are the two texts that we're really going to have as the meat of what we're talking about today under the subject, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Let's go ahead and pray. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity for me to be able to just share with my East Coast family. You know, Miracle City is a special place in my heart, particularly with Pastor Franklin, one of my dear, dear close friends. And thank you for him trusting me again with his people. And so, God, I pray that this word would be anointed. Yes, it's already been recorded, but just anointed again as everybody is getting ready to engage and hear it. And so we pray, God, that you will give us wisdom, you will give us knowledge, understanding, but most importantly, application. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, when you look to the book of Genesis, you see this incredible, beautiful scene, particularly in Genesis chapter 1. When you look at Genesis chapter 2, it's a more detailed version of what takes place on day 6. And here we find what God says in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, as he describes his concept of making man. He says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And then here's the incredible thing that happens. He creates male and female. And when he creates them, he doesn't create them to be these beings that are just living their separate single lives, but he actually creates them to be in a romantic, connected, marital relationship with one another. And so here's the thing I want to make very clear from the outset, that in the book of Genesis, it was God's intention, particularly in the first 2 chapters, before we get to chapter 3 and sin enters into the picture, it was never God's intention for people to live single lives. Yep, I want that to sink in for a minute. In the book of Genesis, chapters 1 and 2, it was not God's intention for people to live single lives. And here's the reason why. Because God's plan was very unique and it was very clear. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reflect my image in mankind. But my image is not going to be singular, but my image is going to be plural, with two people coming together as one. Why? Because that most reflects me, the Godhead, who I am 3 in 1, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but yet we are one. Man and woman, husband and wife. Yes, there are 2, but yet they become one. And that's how my image is going to be reflected inside of them. But here's a unique thing about this concept about God's image being manifested through this incredible married couple. Then what was going to take place is he was going to say, when y'all get together, you're going to replenish the earth. and you're gonna have other little couples and other kids just like you, and then they're gonna meet up with other people, and then they're gonna get married, and they're gonna reflect my image through their relationship, and here is how they are gonna learn about who I am and my character. They're going to not need a preacher. They're not going to need necessarily a church building that they go into to learn about me. But by watching a husband and a wife, a mother and a father interacting together, loving on one another, experiencing joy and happiness and peace and all of these incredible things that come from a joyous, happy relationship, they will then know what it's like to be in a relationship with me and what it's like to be in a relationship with one another. And so I want you guys to get this. God was going to teach humanity about himself through the relationship that would be witnessed between a mother and a father, a husband and a wife. That's how God was getting his image passed down throughout the rest of the world. And so here's what we have to understand very clearly, and I'm going to add something to this, even though this is not said in the Bible, this is just my principle. I want to make that very clear, that I believe our romantic relationships, even in the dating aspect, and especially because the Bible mentions in the marriage aspect, are to reflect the image of God. What that means is that when people look at us in marriage, this is God's original intention. Now watch this. They need to be able to see the love, the character of God, and what it's like to have a relationship with God by the way that we are connected and loving and being with each other. That was God's original intention when it came to this thing called marriage. But then this unique thing takes place in Genesis chapter 3. Sin comes into the picture. And when sin comes into the picture, it messes up this thing called marriage. It messes up this thing with our relationship with God, and everything changes, but yet the principles, I believe, still remain the same. And so now when couples get together, singleness is now an issue because singleness has come into the picture, because sin has now come into the picture. Again, it's not a sin to be single, but now this thing called singleness is now entered into our world. But here is what is unique, though, about a marriage and romantic relationship after sin. Before sin, we didn't need to understand stuff like forgiveness. We didn't need to understand stuff like long suffering. We didn't need to know stuff like mercy and grace. There was no need for those things. But when sin comes into the picture, forgiveness, long suffering, mercy, grace, turbulent times, all of these are a part of our relationship with Jesus, yet we navigate with Jesus through all these difficult, turbulent times. And that's the same principle that happens with our marriages now. In our marriage, in our relationships, we are to reflect the image of God by the way that we forgive, by the way that we understand, by the way that we are long-suffering, by the way that we are gracious, and by the way that we are merciful within our relationships. The point that I want you guys to get today before we go any further is that our relationships as couples need to reflect accurately the image of God. And here is why this becomes so important for us to understand. Because the image of God is not one of pain and always being angry and unhappy, but God's image and his love and a relationship with him, while it has issues, while we have ups and downs, is about joy. It is about happiness. As a matter of fact, doing things right in the name of Christ Jesus is not a burden for us. It's like we get joy out of being obedient because we're so in love with God, not to earn his love, but because we're in love with him. And so our relationship with Jesus needs to be happy. It needs to be healthy. It needs to be whole. And that doesn't mean it's free from issues. It just means that we navigate through them because I'm in a relationship with someone I'm in love with. And that is the same thing when it comes to our relationships. And there has been this kick that people have said marriage is not about happiness, it's about holiness. Marriage is not about you being joyful, it's about you just being able to stick it in. It's almost as if some of us think that the more miserable our marriages are and the more messed up our marriages are, but yet how we can stick through them, that somehow that is like the ultimate badge of honor. That's showing God the greatest joy and greatest respect by being in horrible marriages where there's no good communication, where you're not happy, where you're not being poured into, where selfishness is there, but you know what? At least I'm still there. It's almost as if we're saying, you know what, I really don't love God, but I just come to church. I really don't really care about connecting with God, but I call myself a Christian. That's not what God wants. God doesn't want a group of people that are simply connected to him just for the longevity's sake, but God is after quality. And when it comes to our marriages and when it comes to our relationships, this is what God wants, because a happy marriage accurately reflects the image of God. I want to say that again. A happy marriage accurately reflects the image of God. Marriage is not a burden. Marriage is not your cross to bear. Marriage is not your trial that you're going through. Marriage is where two people come together, yes, have to forgive one another, loving on one another, caring for one another, but they are happy and joyful with one another, because it's that happiness and it's that joy that accurately reflects the image of God. And what I am sick and tired of seeing is marriages where people are together, but they are not accurately reflecting God's image. And I want to make this very clear, that accurately reflecting God's image in marriage is when you and the person that you have committed your life to, even in a relationship, remember I told you I'm adding that, a dating relationship, is that there should be legitimate joy, there should be happiness, there should be peace. Doesn't mean there's not issues, but it is those things that accurately reflect the image of God. But here's our problem. I think we've got a lot of relationships that aren't doing that. And they simply think that they're reflecting God's image by staying in the same house or staying in these horrible relationships. And this is what we want to break down today, is two different types of couples. There's one couple which we are going to call a master couple. A master couple is that couple that stays together and is actually happy. I want you to notice what I just said there. They stay together, but they're actually happy. They're fulfilled. They're turning towards, not away. They're learning love maps. They're building those together. They share fondness and admiration. But then we also have a disaster couple. And what the disaster couple does is one of two things. They either break up, and it's just it. That's a disaster. The thing didn't work out. Or number two, they stay together and they are unhappy. And what I think we find prevalent, particularly in the church, is we have a lot of disaster couples. But we like to reward disaster couples because they stay together, secretly dying inside, being completely unhappy, and do not think that happiness is selfishness. Because remember what we talked about, when we get rid of selfishness in a relationship, I am concerned about your happiness and you're concerned about mine, and we're pouring into one another. So experiencing happiness is not selfishness. It's actually me pouring into you and you pouring into me. But there are a lot of couples that are literally living together, not pouring into each other, but wearing the badge of honor that at least we're still together. That is a disaster. And what we want to be able to do throughout this series, and particularly on today, is move you from being a disaster couple that is together unhappy to now being a master couple that is experiencing true joy and true happiness. So what are one of the key issues when it comes to this idea of the difference between what's making this couple master, together, happy, disaster, together, unhappy, or simply breaking up? I'd like to suggest to you that the reason that couples are experiencing this incredible amount of unhappiness versus the ones that are experiencing a tremendous amount of happiness is this one word that creeps up into every single relationship. Our relationship with God, our relationship with one another, and that is the word conflict. In every relationship, no matter how well it's going, no matter how awesome it is, you will always have conflict. And the couples that are disaster do not manage conflict well. And the couples that are masters actually do manage the conflict well. And so I want you to notice the word that I keep using. Notice I don't simply say solve conflict, but I actually am saying resolve conflict. And here's the reason why. According to research and statistics, over again, 25 plus years of research from Dr. Gottman and one of his partners, is they discovered this. When it comes to relationships, 31% of the problems and the issues and the conflict that come up in your relationship are solvable. 69% of the problems that come up in your relationship are perpetual. I want you guys to check that again. 31% of the issues and conflict that you have within your relationship are literally what we're going to call solvable. It means there can come a very specific end. But 69% of them are perpetual. In other words, more of the issues within your relationship are going to be continual versus ones that you're going to be able to boom, solve, and knock out. And so one of the successes of these master couples is their ability to be able to determine the difference between a conflict that needs to be resolved and a conflict that needs to be managed. And that is, I believe, where one of our big issues are and where we fall and fail in our relationships. Is a lot of us are treating problems that need to be solved as problems that need to be managed. And a lot of us are treating problems that need to be managed as ones that need to be solved. And one of the things that we need to do as individuals is be able to learn the difference. You've got to be able to recognize that when this conflict arises, is this something that we need to like knock out, deal with, and it's going to be solved and then we move on? Or is it something that, you know what, it's probably going to come up again? Because when we take the mindset that something that needs to be managed needs to be solved, it builds up rather the frustration in our lives, because we're like, wait a second, why do I keep going through this over and over again? Why haven't we solved it? And the reason could be not because you both don't have the right relationship skills when it comes to this conflict, but you have not identified this as one that needs to be managed. And when you identify it as one that needs to be managed, you're not frustrated when it keeps coming up. You just say, you know what? It's going to come up again. Let's manage through it. But the problem is we don't know how to tell the difference. So let me give you a quick example. I'm going to use the most out the box one, as it were, or almost the most extreme. If you're in a situation and your spouse is, or your boyfriend or girlfriend is engaging in flirtatious behavior with somebody else that is not you, that is not something you manage, right? That's something we need to solve. That's something we get to the bottom of. We've got to manage this part, solve this particular issue. We cannot manage that, because I cannot be in a relationship with somebody who is continually giving someone else inappropriate attention. So I'm able to determine that, and we're going to work to see what we need to do to solve that. But then there's some other ones that will perpetually continue to come up, like learning one another and not always getting it right. You're never going to know one another perfectly. And there's always going to be that conflict that arises between me misunderstanding you, not really getting you. And so I'm going to manage through that. And so the first thing we need to understand about conflict is learning the difference between the conflicts that need to be solved and the conflicts that need to be managed. The second thing that we need to know when it comes to this idea of conflict, not just the difference between the ones that need to be solved and the ones that need to be managed, but we also need to know our conflict management styles. Now, this is huge. This is important. And this is something hopefully that you're figuring out during the getting to know as friends and then eventually dating process. I want to know what my conflict management style is and what yours is, because that is also going to play a huge part on how we deal and manage with conflict. So there are 3 conflict management styles that I want to bring to your attention. You might have read some other ones, but these are the 3, if you're following along and you're tracking with us for the series, that we are going to be using. The first one is going to be the avoidant person. And the avoidant person really doesn't want to express emotion. They like to shy away from conflict. They really don't want to engage. They want to keep as much peace and safety, even if that means that they don't necessarily have to get really deep or engage and manage in these conflicts. And for the most part, they'll say that they're generally happy. And the reason they're generally happy is because they never run into conflict, because they are trying to avoid it. And some of you guys know avoiders who are avoidant, and what your conflict style is. When something comes up, you don't want to say how you feel. It could be for a variety of reasons, whether you're unsafe, whether it's your personality style, but you just like to avoid this. That's the avoidant, the first conflict management style. The second conflict management style is the volatile. Now, I'm just going to tell you, that's me. And that word sounds very difficult and it's hard, but listen to this definition. And all of them have their own issues and positives and negatives and things of that nature. So I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. But when it comes to this volatile style, these are people who are very expressive. Like, you could tell me, like, real talk, when I get into a conflict with somebody, I'm not always angry. I'm not upset. I'm just very passionate. And that comes across. They're really trying to get their opinion through. They're trying to be persuasive from the jump. They're trying to get somebody to see their point of view. Yo, here's where I'm coming from. Here's what I'm feeling. And they're going to get that out in the open. They also can add humor. They can laugh. They can try to make it light, but it's going to be a lot of energy coming your way. That is the volatile. And then we have the last conflict management style, which is validating. This is the individual who is just kind of chill and they're real calm. They're really into understanding, extremely empathetic. And what they want to do is they want to hear your point of view. Like they're really trying to get into where you are and what it is you're thinking and what it is that you're feeling and how they can understand better. Very neutral, not necessarily coming at you hard, but they're not avoidant. They're just kind of chilling in between that volatile and avoidant style, but they're there to be empathetic and they're there to listen. So those are the three different conflict management styles. Now, let me give you an example. There are certain conflict management styles that are going to have a very difficult time being together, and I would almost suggest that they might not should be together, right? Like they shouldn't, there's a good possibility you probably shouldn't and won't do well if you figure out what someone's conflict management style is, particularly in the way they match. And I'm gonna use this big mismatch. If you are volatile and you are with somebody who is avoidant, your conflict is going to be very difficult to be able to manage. Here's the reason why. Because when it comes to your conflict, the volatile's like, yo, let me persuade you, let me talk to you, let me engage, let's laugh, let's connect, let's get this thing out. But the avoidant is like, yo, I really don't want to talk about this. Step away, you're too pressuring, this is too much. And so the need of the avoidant is give me space. The need of the volatile is, nope, I don't want space. Let's get in this thing together and let's figure this thing out right here and right now. And so those two really don't go well together. And so I want you to see the problems that are taking place when it comes to this thing within our conflict, that we don't know all the time the difference between problems that need to be solved and ones that need to be managed. And then we don't truly understand our own conflict management style and our partner's conflict management style. And now when we bring all of those things into conflict, you can see how that can begin to erode the happiness of a relationship. Because remember, 69% of the conflict you are going to experience is perpetual. So imagine having perpetual conflict with mismatching management styles, not knowing your management styles, and not being able to tell the difference between the ones that are solvable and the ones that are avoidable. Conflict. And that's why we need to understand this thing today. So when we look at this sound relationship house or our sound relationship palace, remember what we've been talking about, this relationship house. This is what we want to build. And we looked at this foundational level of connection, which leads to intimacy, which now leads to trust. And now we look at this next section, and the big part that we want to focus on today is what we've been talking about so far, is this idea of managing conflict. A huge part of your house. If you notice, this is right here in the middle, built on top of the foundation. And we talked about that last week, and you're going to see so clearly in just a moment how this ties in. So remember, in our series, what we are trying to do is build our palace for eternity, this sound relationship palace. And last week, we really broke down the foundation of that, which was connection by building love maps together, getting our PhDs and our partners, but then also turning towards and not away and against. And then also, which we didn't spend a tremendous amount of time in, but this idea of sharing fondness and admiration for one another. And here's what we said, that when we have these connections that we make with one another, from learning the love mats and making these deposits in one another, then what happens is we build connection. And then from connection, we get intimacy. From intimacy, we then get this incredible thing called trust, which is on the side of the house. But now, as we're building upon that, there's another two layers to this house. One, which is the positive perspective. We'll touch on that in just a moment. But the main crux there in the middle, if you notice, in the middle of this palace is managing conflict. That is the key. That is the thing. And you're going to see even more so why in just a moment. But we want you to see this. We're still building this palace. So these things you need to have. This connection, which leads to intimacy, which leads to trust. And now, how is it that we go about managing this thing called conflict? So there's this unique concept that takes place. Remember, I'm taking a lot of the research and study that I've done with Dr. Gottman as well as my own research. And there was this very interesting thing that finds its way into our relationships. And it is called NSO. What NSO is negative sentiment override. What this means is I've had so many negative experiences with my partner in my relationship that now the things that they say and do, even when they are innocent, even when they are truly coming from a good place, I don't view their words or their actions that way because I have so much negativity in our experience in our relationship. What does that negativity look like? It means like somebody who's making more withdrawals than they are deposits. They're turning away and against and not towards. And so I've developed this NSO. And so imagine what ends up taking place now. I have this NSO, this negative sentiment override, and now I go into conflict with somebody that I view negatively. So now when they're even legitimately trying to share feelings, when they're legitimately trying to talk to me through different things and trying to work something out, I don't view it that way. I view it through these negative lens. And that a lot of times I think is the problem that creeps up into our relationships is because we have experienced so much negative sentiment override. Too many negative experiences with our partners. And because of those negative experiences, now we view things that they say and things that we do, even innocently, through these negative eyes. Now, I want to pause here and make a point because I'd like to suggest to you that the devil is the king of negative sentiment override, not only within relationships with one another, but I think also our relationship with God. What he wants to do is create as many negative experiences around you and your heavenly Father, negative experiences around you in church and anything that has to do with God, so that now anything godly that comes your way, you view it through negative sentiment override. You view it through negative lens. And this is part of the reason why there are individuals who do not want much to do with the church because they've experienced so much negativity inside of the church. And so anything that resembles God and anything that resembles spirituality, they don't want to mess with it. And let's think about, Pat, over your life when you were wearing a skirt into church and somebody pulled you aside and said you shouldn't wear that, or maybe you got pregnant before you got married and the way that the church handled that, you're adding more to the negativity. Maybe the way that people treated your friend when you brought them in who was not a believer and the way that they were looked at, all of these negative experiences. And so now anything that has to do with God, we reject. Maybe there was a prayer that you prayed that was not answered and the devil messed with you and said, see, God doesn't love you. He doesn't like you. He doesn't care for you. That's why your father still died. That's why your mother's now sick. And we build up this negative sentiment override. And so anything that God tries to do through and for our lives, we look at it through negative lens. So imagine trying to be in a relationship with somebody where everything that you do is negative, or everything rather that they do is negative in your mind, no matter what space in their heart that it's coming from. And so the only way that you can resolve that kind of conflict is not to try to resolve it. So imagine a couple comes in to see me and they want to sit down, they want to talk, and I pick up that there's this incredible negative sentiment override. No way I can solve the problem. Wherever the issue is, I can't solve it no matter what kind of skills, because I cannot solve the problem until I change the lens by which one or both are viewing each other. So the only way to change negative sentiment override is to actually create positive sentiment override. Now, how do we create positive sentiment override? We learned that honestly last week. All throughout your relationship, there are bids for connection. And when those bids for connection are being made, every single time we connect, we are making that deposit. And the more deposits we are making, the more we are able to change the prescription that somebody is using to view me and view the relationship. And so if I can turn more towards, if I can take advantage of those sliding door moments throughout the day, then I'm putting positive deposits inside of this person's bank. And the more positive deposits I put in their bank, now they begin to change their prescription. And when they change the prescription, they don't view me as negative. Now they start to view me as positive. And they're not viewing me and what I say and what I do as positive just because I'm saying it, but now they're getting the proof through the consistent ways I'm turning towards, through the ways that I'm pouring into them. And remember, I know how to pour because I got my PhD in you. So I'm not just randomly doing some cool things. No, I'm doing the things that I know you like, whether it's quality time, whether it's gifts, words of affirmation, touch, acts of service, whatever those things would be. I know I'm getting my PhD. And the more more that I do that, I create positive sentiment override. And so when a couple goes into conflict and they have positive sentiment override, here's what happens. They get inside the ring, and the ring is called conflict. And before, with the negative sentiment override, it was me at one end and my partner on the other end. And we're going at it with one another because we're against each other, that negative sentiment override. But now that I've made the deposits, turned towards and not against, built love maps, learning and showing that I've got my PhD and I'm in the class and I'm studying and I'm getting this thing right. Now, when we're in the ring, it is not me against my partner. It's me and my partner against the problem. And that's where we're falling apart. We're in the ring against each other. And it's not me against you. It is us against the thing. Whatever the conflict is, it's us tackling it together. But you cannot do that without positive sentiment override. And the only way that that is created in a relationship is through intentionally pouring into each other so that you view each other through positive lens. Now, I want to say one more thing about that before I give you this ratio. Sometimes in a relationship, and I want to make this very clear, you will be the only one for a moment, based on what's happening, because I'm getting a lot of this, who has to make deposits. There's going to be a moment, and there could be some times, where someone is only viewing you negatively. And you want to be able to view them positively, but they're not pouring into you because they view you negatively. And so you have to be the bigger, quote unquote, person. Scratch that. I'm sorry. I shouldn't even say that. That was absolutely inappropriate for me to say. Not be the bigger person, but be the more intentional person in this moment. Because they could be very hurt, they could be very broken, and that is why they are not able to give back to you in the way that they should, or give to you in the way that they should. But what you can do in those moments is you got to dig deep and say, you know what? You're looking at me negatively and you're not able to give right now, but I am going to pour into you so that there will be no question in your mind how I feel about you, how committed I am to this relationship, that even in the midst of you not pouring back into me, I'm going to empty myself into you. And when you see me now differently because of all I put into you, that's going to create this positive sentiment that you have about me. And then when we enter into that issue, you'll see that we are allies on the same team and that we're not against each other. Now, I want to make something very clear. I don't know how long an individual can be the only one giving and not receiving. That's not how we're built. We're not built to only give. We're built to give and receive. That's a completely different topic that we'll tackle on one of our Thursday night Moody's Mood for Love. But just know there is going to come a moment where you have to pour more into than you will get from your partner. Now, with that being said, here is one of the ratios that we have discovered in research as it comes to conflict and outside of conflict that really helps be able to ensure that your conflict is managed the right way. There is a 5-to-1, and the couples that are successful in managing conflict that it comes, they have what is called a 5-to-1 positive to negative interaction ratio. What that means is within conflict and outside of conflict, for every 5 positive interactions they have as a couple, they only have 1 negative interaction. But the couples that don't do well at managing this conflict have a 0.8-to-1 positive to negative interaction ratio. What that means is for every 0.8 positive experience they have as a couple, they only have one negative experience. So they literally have more negative experiences in the relationship than they do positive, and also within the conflict. Now, here is what your goal needs to be throughout your relationship. And I know it seems like an equation, but I want you to treat it in this sense so you can be intentional. You should be making sure every day that your ratio of 5-to-1 is there. Notice that it doesn't mean we're not going to have a negative interaction. It doesn't mean that we can avoid making each other upset and hurting. But what it means is for every hurt and for every negative, I'm going to have 5 positives. And I'm going to know exactly what they are. Why? I got my PhD in you. We're building love maps, and I'm turning towards, not away, and I'm not missing the sliding door moments. That's huge to build up your ratio. Your ratio going into conflict really is going to determine a big amount of the success that you're going to have when it comes to this conflict. Now, I want to get to the main crux. Now, don't be scared. Like, oh my goodness, was that just the introduction? No, that wasn't just the introduction. But now we're really getting into where we're trying to get to today. Because remember, we talked about the difference between these master couples and disaster couples. Master, happy, and together. So there's longevity and quality. Disaster, they've either completely broken up or they have longevity, but they don't have quality. They can stay together, but extremely unhappy. Now, Dr. Gottman, with up to 93 or 96% accuracy, is able to determine, when he was studying all these different couples over these years, was able to determine up to 93 or 96% accuracy whether or not a couple would stay together or whether or not they would be divorced. Now, you can't just say, based on those numbers, that it's easy because 50% of couples get divorced, so you can have an easy way to just guess. You can't have 93% and guess in that kind of ratio. No, this is intentional. Like, he is nailing this down and he is seeing something. So what he would do is he would set up these couples and he would be able to watch them in this apartment. He'd have them stay in this one little place. They'd have hidden video cameras there and he would watch them discuss. And he would be intentional and ask them to discuss an issue in a place where they were having some conflict. He would watch it. After a while, it'd take a little bit for them to get natural, getting used to the new settings. But he would watch them. Go back, of course, and watch these tapes. And after watching these tapes, up to 93 to 96% accuracy, not having to look at people, he was able to getting to the point where he was able to look at couples and see within 3 minutes whether or not they would stay together. After he figured this thing out, whether 3 minutes they could stay together. And he found out something, that he was able to determine whether or not a couple would stay married or get divorced based on the manner in which they handled conflict. Now that was a game changer when I heard that, because think about this. 69% is perpetual. And I can determine whether or not you are going to stay in your relationship, as Dr. Gottman's saying, based on the way that you handle the 69%, this perpetual conflict that comes up. So we called this our sermon, The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 6, we start to see the seals that are being opened. And after each of the first four seals are opened, it reveals a different horse that is being introduced to us in the book of Revelation. Now, as these horses are being introduced to us in Revelation, here is what that means. It is a sign of the end. The horsemen represent a more detailed or another look at what we learned about history in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. And these horsemen now are a sign and a symbol and pointing us to, hey, y'all, the end is near. Because the seals are being opened up and these horsemen are now being unleashed. And Dr. Gottman saw the same exact thing when it comes to conflict in relationships. That when these four things showed up in your relationship, it was a sign that they were the end. When these four things that we're about to get into show up in your conflict, it was an incredibly accurate predictor of divorce. Notice he didn't say when you don't have conflict. He simply said, and this is over 25 years of research, that when these four horsemen show up in your conflict, this is the sign that your relationship is getting ready to come to an end. I don't want to scare you, but I want you to take this next section seriously, because remember, the success of society and the church and what we're able to experience as people in our community, and yes, Black people in particular, relationships are a huge part of the success of the rest of our lives. And we have got to pay attention to these things that we have allowed to come into our relationships and equal the sign of the end. The four horsemen of the apocalypse. Y'all ready? Get your paper out. It's going to be on the screen, but I need you guys to get this because we're about to give you something that I promise you is going to save somebody's relationship today. It's going to save somebody's relationship today. Let's go. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into each horseman and we're going to show you this is what you should not do. These are the horsemen you don't want to come in, but I'm also going to give you the antidote for what you should do instead of this particular horseman that shows up. So the first horseman that shows up is going to be criticism. Criticism. That is one thing that in conflict, if that happens, you are going to find that that is a horseman. That is something that you do not want to have in conflict. Now, when we say criticism, here's what we mean. Where you now do not attack the problem, but you attack someone's personality or you attack their character. So now, instead of you talking and fighting against the issue and speaking to the issue, now you're speaking against the person, who they are, what they stand for, their character. And when you start to attack this person, you no longer are on the same team, but now we're fighting against each other and we're not fighting against the problem. And let's think about that. How many times have your arguments and your conflict denigrated into you just criticizing one another or you simply being criticized? And imagine now criticism coming in and you already have negative sentiment override towards your partner. I mean, this could just completely and totally tear down any way that you can get to the bottom of what the issue is, because you're never truly dealing with the issue. You're constantly attacking the person. And any time that criticism begins to arise within conflict, I have to tell you, you can no longer continue arguing. You can no longer continue going back and forth because you are not anymore talking about the problem. You're simply criticizing the person. There's got to be a timeout that's called, and you've got to stop in this whole thing of criticism because you can never move forward while one is continually criticizing the other. Now, I want to say this, that criticism does not mean that you are not addressing a poor behavior. Criticism doesn't mean you're not allowed to talk about what you didn't like. What it means, though, is I can dislike someone and still respect you. Something rather, and still respect you. I can still not like something that you did and not attack you for doing it. Because I'm not going to put an assumption, I'm not going to put a motive on why you did it. I just want to deal with what you did and the feelings that it caused and the damage that it did to me. Let's deal with that. But what I'm not going to do is begin to criticize you and tear down your character. So one of the things that we can do when there's something that comes up, instead of criticizing, what we do is what we're going to call a gentle startup. What I'm going to do is I am going to bring this to your attention and I'm going to use I words. For example, when this took place, I felt this way. Notice I'm not going to simply say you did this and you're a bad person and this is how I feel because you did this because you wanted to hurt me. No. Not criticizing or attacking your character. I'm simply sharing with you how something made me feel. I'm not using you. I'm not using words like always or never. I'm simply sharing with you how I feel in a very gentle way. Hey, hon, can we sit down and talk? The other day, something was said. And I just have to let you know that when you said this is how I felt. This is how I felt. This is how I took it. And I really wanted to see, can we address that? Because this is the kind of hurt that I experienced. And I know you probably did not mean that at all, but I have to tell you how it felt. Can we talk more about that? That's a gentle startup. There's no criticism there, but I'm still able to address what happened, talk about how it made me feel, and that I want to get past this. Now, I've got to say something about the gentle startup, and brothers, I want to help you out just a little bit. Sisters, please don't take this any other way. But according to research, when an issue is brought up, 70+% of the time, the woman in your life, brothers, is going to bring up the issue. So if there's ever conflict, if there's ever issues, most of the time, the majority of the time, the woman is going to be the one to bring it up. Now, here's the thing that's very interesting that research also shows. Even when a woman can bring this up in a gentle startup way, the majority of the time when an issue escalates past where it should, it is because we as men escalated. So I know, brothers, you were like, I knew it. They bring it up all the time. It's all on them. Yep, but when it gets to a place it shouldn't get, it's on us. Because even when gentle startups come, we actually, unfortunately, begin to raise that thing to the next level. Like your boo is coming towards you and she genuinely wants understanding. She genuinely wants care, but usually we take that thing and we go to the next level. And that's what's going to bring in the second horseman, and that is defensiveness. So what defensiveness is when I am victimizing myself to ward off attacks or perceived, attacks from my partner. And again, that goes into, again, that negative sentiment override, because sometimes when somebody's bringing something to your attention, they're not doing it out of some negativity. They just want to share with you something that took place. But what we do is we begin to get defensive. And we're like, no, that's not me. And we begin to make excuses for our actions. And in some cases, we begin to blame that person. And one of the things about a defensive person is they never want to take accountability for what it is that they have done, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to produce a feeling. You see, one of the things that has to be very clear is I am not responsible for your actions, but I am responsible for your feelings. And so if you feel a certain way, I can accept that. Because you know what? I'm responsible for that. Now, I didn't do it on purpose, but I get that something I did invoked some kind of feeling in you. But what we cannot do is when our partner is expressing to us how an action, intentional or unintentional, has made us feel, we cannot get defensive. Because that's when a horseman comes in. Because the more I'm on the defense, we are not working together to attack whatever the issue is. But I'm defending myself from you because I'm perceiving you as someone who is coming after me. And guess what? They're not coming after you. They're coming after the problem. But here is why I think also a lot of us get defensive. Because we truly don't want to acknowledge ourselves. Like, it's hard for us to admit that you are a person that is capable of hurting somebody. And here's the thing, that's okay. Because a bad person is not somebody who hurts somebody. That's not a bad person. The bad person is someone who hurts someone and doesn't take accountability for the hurt, whether I do it intentionally or not. You see, we've got this misrepresentation that the world has told us that when we make poor decisions, that makes us bad people. No. What makes us bad people is when we make poor decisions and are not accountable for the decisions that we made. That's what makes us bad people. That's what makes it where you don't really want to look at yourself, is because I'm sitting here saying, wait a second, I'm a bad person. You're not bad when you can be accountable. That's actually what's good. It's good that you can mess up, do something that you had no business doing, hurting your partner, saying the wrong thing, but being accountable for it. And that's actually the antidote for this horseman of defensiveness. When somebody brings something to you, do not be defensive, be accountable. Be accountable. And I'm not saying you're accountable for something you did not do. So if someone's putting an emotion on you or a motive on you, you can be accountable for how you made them feel. But don't spend time trying to say, well, you know what? I didn't do that on purpose. You know what? That wasn't my intention. Man, forget all that. Leave that alone. Embrace that there was something you did, whether intentional or unintentional, that has brought some feeling or some hurt or some disappointment on your partner, and deal with that and be accountable from that and grow from that. The antidote to defensiveness is accountability. And in our conflict, we need more accountability, because when defensiveness comes in, we never are able to figure out not only what the issue is, but also what is the issue in me. So the third horseman that comes into our relationships is what we're going to call stonewalling. Stonewalling is when I express disapproval, separation, and I don't want to deal with this conflict. 69% is perpetual, but I don't want to deal with it. I don't even want to mess with it. Let's not even talk about it. And this isn't just simply only me stonewalling by just literally not talking to you. This could be something as simple and easy as you're trying to talk, we're trying to have this conflict, we're trying to sit down and work through some stuff, but I don't want to have much to do with it. And so I'll be on my phone, I'll be doing something else, looking off in the corner, and I'm just not going to be engaged. I'm disengaging in this conflict. That is what we call stonewalling. And what it does is it puts up this wall, literally, between you and your partner. So now when I'm trying to break through and we're trying to attack this issue, I can't get to the issue until I first break down the wall. And that's what a lot of us are doing within our relationships. We stonewall. And so see, here's the thing about stonewalling. You can have peace in stonewalls, because what happens is I put up this wall. And so if I can't get through the wall, no one is constantly just banging on the wall. Because eventually, if I keep pushing on this wall, I'm going to hurt my hand. So I back off. And so now you don't hear the banging, and there's this peace almost, as it were, in your relationship. And so you think that the absence of conflict means that there is peace and joy and happiness. And so you're kind of sitting in this fake sense and this false sense of happiness because you've got this wall up that protects you from dealing with the real issue. But here's the problem, and you know it. You stonewall all day long. You don't want to deal with this issue. But there's still something missing because you are not getting to the core of what the issue is. And so now you still have these feelings that need to be resolved. But because of your stonewalling, you're not able to connect with the person to do it. And because you've got this wall up, you're not turning towards them, you're turning away from them. And now you're empty because no one's able to put a deposit into you because you put a wall up. And in order for me to get to your bank, I've got to tear down the wall. But every time I take out a brick, you put a new one in because you're stonewalling, and your absence of having conflict does not equal happiness because secretly inside, you still blame that partner and you still hold against them issues that you are unwilling to truly talk about. Now, here's what a stonewaller actually does need, because there's a reason why a lot of us stonewall. Sometimes we can't talk about things in the moment, can we? Sometimes we actually are like, yo, I need to talk through this thing because I'm not as quick on my feet. I need to process. I want to understand my feelings a little bit more. I'm a little too hot-headed. Whatever the case is. And so the antidote to stonewalling is what we are going to call self-soothing. Now, there's two ways I want you to approach self-soothing. When you feel the need to stonewall, meaning I don't want to talk about this, I want to step away, what you need to do is tell your partner, hey, I need a timeout. That's the first thing you want to do, timeout. So, hey, hun, I know you want to talk through this, and I know this is super important to you. I want to be all in. I want it to be me and you against the problem. Right now, my mind is all over the place. I need about an hour or two that I could just sit down and I can just kind of process. You might not need 2 hours. You might need 30 minutes. You might need 20 minutes. So, babe, I'm not rejecting you. This is what you have to say. I'm not rejecting you. It's not that I don't want to talk. I just need some moments to kind of self-soothe through what it is that's taking place. That's one way that we can deal with stonewalling. Because now look at what you're doing. You and your partner are on the court together, right? You're doing your thing. Things are getting hectic. You're calling the timeout. And what's the timeout for? The timeout is to regroup, organize, get your strategy, and then let's go back on the court and take our opponent out. Because the opponent is not you. The opponent is the problem. And I don't want to stonewall you because I need you to solve this. But I know right now, the state of mind I'm in, I need to self-soothe. And how do you self-soothe? Do an activity that's going to calm you down, whether it's listening to music, reading a book, Bible verse, whatever it is, going on a quick walk, sitting down and meditating silently, just getting in a clean, cool space where you can just empty your mind, start to work through some of the thoughts and feelings that you have. And when you get through some of that within yourself, then you're able to re-engage. There's nothing wrong with calling a timeout. The problem is when you call a timeout and you and your teammate have not agreed to it. See, calling a timeout isn't you just saying, I'm not talking to you, bye. It's literally going to your teammate, your partner, and saying, hey, can we pause here? I need to chill out. I need to think through some stuff. I'm not ready to handle this. Give me time to do that. And that is what we mean also by self-soothing. Now, let me tell you something else I've learned about this idea of self-soothing. And this is a little different than maybe what some of you might have heard when it comes to self-soothing. Remember, I said I put a little remix onto it. But part of self-soothing, I also believe, is there are some issues that come up that I want to share with my partner. Like there's a conflict in my mind that they maybe did something, I heard something, I saw something, and I experienced something, and I want to talk to them about it. What I'd like to suggest is maybe sometimes before you immediately send the text or before you immediately say we need to talk, what if you took a moment to self-soothe and you just kind of replayed everything in your mind and you kind of said to yourself, you know what? I think this is okay. I don't need to get into a conflict about this. I don't think they meant it. I'm pretty sure they didn't. I'm going to check to see if this happens more regularly, but right now, I'm good. I'm good. I thought this through. I'm not going to bring up every little thing that comes our way. I'm going to self-soothe. And I think that's a huge part of how it is that we can navigate through conflict. So remember, The antidote to stonewalling, putting up that wall, is calling a timeout and self-soothing so that you can then be prepared to re-engage and tear down that wall. Now, the fourth and final horseman, and I need you guys, please, if I haven't lost you yet, this is one of the most important horsemen in the fact that this is the greatest predictor of divorce, of breakups, when this comes into our conflict. So what that means is we don't want any of the horsemen to come in. But a lot of these are very, we're going to manage those. You can do these different things to be able to work through and to eliminate these horsemen. But when this one comes in, it is a huge sign that your relationship is more than likely on the place of game ready to end, and you need some serious intervention. So if you're listening to me and this horseman is in your relationship, you need some help. And it's okay to admit that, because this is how we do it. We build our palaces by being able to get help. So this fourth horseman is actually the horseman of contempt. And this is where I'm doing more than criticizing my partner, but I'm actually degrading them. I am, for all intents and purposes, emotionally and verbally abusing them, because now I look at them with contempt. This takes place verbally through name calling, through the manner in which I do, my body language. I roll my eyes, I cross my arms, I scoff. Oh, please, you don't make no sense. I mean, this, for all intents and purposes, is abusive behavior that takes place within a conflict. You're calling them stupid, outside of their name. You're cussing at one another. And the reason that you're able to have contempt for a person is because you really don't respect who they are. You have no value. They have no value in your eyes. And this is not volatile. Remember, the volatile is just passionate. And there's still laughter and there's still connection. And they just want to persuade you. But the person who has contempt, they have contempt for you as a human being. And they don't respect you. And they don't think you have much to offer. And they look down upon you. And your opinion doesn't matter, not because you are wrong simply, but because you don't matter. So your opinion doesn't matter and your input doesn't matter because you don't matter. They have contempt for you. And if you are in conflict, in a relationship with someone that has contempt for you, it's hard for you to go any further, because if you don't respect me, if you don't value me, then how on earth can we move forward? Like, we can't do that. And that's why it's the greatest predictor, because you can only be in contempt for so long. And I've got to tell you this, that after a while, even in our relationship with Jesus Christ, at the end of the day, Jesus says, you know what? You clearly don't want to be here. You don't value me. You don't care for me. You don't love me. I've given you free choice, and I've loved on you, and I've poured on you, and I've given you all that I can give you. But it seems that you don't value me. You don't respect me as your Savior. You don't love me. You don't see what it is that I bring. You don't want to listen to anything I have to say. There's contempt that you have for me. Therefore, there's going to come a time where Jesus has to say, let him who is righteous be righteous still. Let him who is filthy be filthy still. And it's the same thing that will happen also in our earthly relationships, that this contempt that you are constantly in, nobody can stay in that and keep their mind. And that's why it's the greatest predictor of divorce. That's why it is. Contempt. And how many of us right now are in a contemptuous type of relationship where in your conflict, this horseman just keeps showing up. And sometimes, it rips you apart and you're broken because you're coming in such peace and you're coming to really want to solve, but the person that you're with has so much contempt for you. So what is the solution? How do we go about approaching this idea of contempt? The manner in which we do that, and the antidote to that, is what we found in the house, the positive perspective, and more specifically, building a culture of appreciation. You see, if I'm holding you in contempt, if I have a contemptuous view of you and who you are as a person, I have not learned to appreciate the things that make you you. And that's what we've got to do. That's a part of what this positive perspective is about. What I need to do is be able to look at you and be able to say, you know what? You bring a lot to the table. You are an incredible person and human being. And this is also a part, this is why it all ties together, of getting your PhD and your partner. Because I'm not just learning you for the things that you love and like. I'm learning you and I'm learning your map because I now get to see you. I get to see you in all your joy, yes, even your pain, but I get to see who you are as a person. And the more that I see that, I want to create this culture where I appreciate that, because it's hard to have contempt for a person that you value. It's hard to have a contempt for a person that you appreciate. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll sit down with my couples and I'll ask them the question, what do you appreciate about this person? And I want you to notice a few things that start to happen most of the time. The first thing they do is they always appreciate the things that they've done. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but I want to challenge you to go deeper. When somebody asks you, what do you appreciate about your partner? Instead of sharing with people what they've done, appreciate who they are. Not just what they do, not just that they take care of this and how they always are there for that and always do this and always do that. No. I want you, who are they? Like, do you appreciate their character? Do you appreciate the person that they are, who they've developed to be? And when you can appreciate who someone is, it makes contempt that much harder to come into your relationship. We've got to build a culture of appreciation. And you cannot build a culture of appreciation if you do not take the time to intentionally know the person you're appreciating. How do I know you? I'm getting my PhD in you, and I'm building love maps with you. And the more I'm building love maps and the more I'm learning, the more I appreciate. And the more I appreciate, the harder it is for contempt to come into this relationship, because I've got the positive perspective and I've learned to build a culture of appreciation within this relationship. So those are 4 horsemen. Now, I got to tell you, they show up. And when they show up, you can't keep going. You've got to study this. I'm telling you, you've got to study this and recognize that when defensiveness shows up, well, time out. We can't go forward until I figure out why you're being defensive. And sometimes what you got to do is say, hey, boo, you know what? Here's the language I want you guys to use. Hey, boo, this horse just came rolling in. Like, seriously, the horse just came rolling in. And because that horse is in, whether it's criticism, contempt, stonewalling, or defensive, boo, let's reset. Let's start all over. Because if we keep going, this horse is just going to ride around. It's just going to start to tear stuff up. Because the goal of the horsemen is to bring about the end. That's why they're the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These 4 horsemen want to come into your relationship, into your conflict, because they want to end it. That's what they want to do. And what we've got to do is protect our relationships from these horsemen, because the conflict is going to be there. You're not going to avoid it. But what you can do is say, you know what? We are making a commitment the other side of that house today. That my commitment is not just to you as a person, but my commitment is that we will not let the horsemen into this relationship. We're not going to let that happen. And when they come in, we're going to call it out, because we're on the same team. It's not me against you. It's me and you against the issue. And if one of us brings in the horseman, we're going to call it out, because that's how you become this master couple and you become happy. And let me tell you something else that's crazy about conflict. People who raise their voices, people who kind of get very excited and stuff during the issue, during the conflict, they're not the ones that have the problem. It's the ones that allow the horsemen to come in. You know what else they said that you could do? And I want to give you just a few tips as we get ready to close. Sometimes what you have to do in the middle of it, and that horseman comes in, here's an exercise. This is great, and this is tough. I want you guys to say, oh, honey, hold on a second. That horseman's in. I see it. Can we just stop? And can we just hold hands for 12 seconds? And you just sit there. And you just, in silence, and you just look at one another. And there's something about that. There's something about just stopping and connecting. I'm not talking about some imaginary energy that flows through both of you, but there's something about looking at each other and stopping and saying, it's me and you in this together. It's me and you. You gotta stop, and you gotta do that. You've got to do that. You've got to do that. Sometimes, and you can insert humor into some of this art. Man, that horseman just showed up again. Can you believe that? I don't know what he's doing right here, because we don't even know how to ride horses. What are they doing up in here? Now, some people would say, oh, that's ridiculous and that's disrespectful. Not when you have positive sentiment override, because you don't look at their humor as disrespectful. You look at it as a way to kind of ease the tension so we can move forward in this relationship. So what we really want to be able to be are these master couples that accurately reflect the image of God. And so now there's somebody here under the sound of my voice that really needs to make a decision for Christ. Wherever you are and wherever it is that you may be watching, here is your opportunity to connect with Jesus in a very specific and intentional way. Because in your relationship with Jesus, what you don't want to do is you don't want to build up these walls. Like, you don't want to stonewall Jesus. You don't want to be defensive with Jesus. You don't want to criticize him, and you don't want to have contempt for him. And so I know today that as a result of what we heard, you said, God, I want to pour completely and totally into you. Your pastor, Pastor David Franklin, he's about to lead you into the decisions and how you can make this incredible decision for him that is going to change your life, not only for now, but also for eternity.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. I pray that you were blessed by this message. We'd love to connect with you beyond this moment. So I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get updates on when a new sermon is posted, as well as when we go live during our worship experiences on Saturdays at 12 p.m. Also, you can connect with us on social media. You can go to Facebook or Instagram and look for Miracle City Church. And on Twitter, you can find us at Miracle City Life. We really do believe that God's doing something special in this congregation and in this family. And we're so blessed that you've chosen to connect with us. And if you've been blessed and you want to be a blessing, we invite you to go to our website. You can find all the information for giving there by going to miraclecitychurch.org/give. And we know the Lord will bless you for your generosity. Thanks so much for being part of what God is doing here. And we pray many blessings on your life.